A second failed attempt to evacuate a besieged Ukrainian city. 200,000 people were expected to leave Mariupol, but only a handful made it out before Russian forces broke the ceasefire.
We're told that so far only 3 families have managed to escape from that port city, dodging the shelling as they went.
Also ahead, fighting gets closer to Kyiv, with Russian troops just 15 miles from the city centre. The UN confirms 1.5 million civilians have now fled Ukraine, the fastest-growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. But here in Britain, the Home Office says so far only 50 applicants have been granted access through its Visa Family Scheme.
This is ITV News with Lucrezia Millarini.
Good evening. The people of Mariupol remain trapped in a city without power or water this evening, with Russian soldiers and the threat of shelling from every side. For a second day, attempts to let them leave failed as a ceasefire was broken within hours. Meanwhile, Russian forces are getting ever closer to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and as their advance continues, the number of Ukrainians racing out of the country has passed 1.5 million. Our first report comes from Romilly Weeks, who's in the city of Lviv.
Just half a mile from the outskirts of Kyiv, the aftermath of a Russian attack on a warehouse. But on the city's outskirts, people are the target too. In Irpin, a town under Russian bombardment, people are being shelled as they leave. It's residents trying to escape across this makeshift bridge. But this is a town where it's not safe to stay, and it's not safe to go. It's a story repeated in Mariupol. Over 400,000 people are under siege here. For a second day, they packed their bags because a humanitarian corridor was promised. For a second day, they returned to shelters when the Russians resumed firing instead. Ukrainian hopes tossed to the wind. No journey in this country is without pain. Lviv in the west is where those who do manage to escape are arriving. A confused, chaotic staging post for exhausted families, because this is the scene that greets them.
The UN is calling this the fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War, and this is what it looks like. Thousands upon thousands of people arriving here at the train station in Lviv, cradling their children, carrying their pets and their luggage. And as far as you can see, stretching down here, more people arriving, trying to leave. Many of them with just no idea where they will go. How old are your children?
3 and 1.5.
Vitaly has managed to escape from the ruins of Kharkiv under heavy Russian shelling.
You've been traveling for 22 hours?
Yeah, to Ternopil. And then here we like 5 hours from Ternopil to Lviv, because trains are moving very slowly, because there were many trains on the lines. Yeah.
And how are you managing with your children?
We have no choice.
As we're filming, this lady wants to tell me her story. She's had to leave her son behind in Kharkiv. We barely need a translator to understand her pain. Romilly Weeks, ITV News, Lviv.
Well, let's talk more about that failed attempt to evacuate the citizens of Mariupol. Our correspondent Dan Rivers has travelled to this city of Zaporizhzhia, where the evacuees had hoped to arrive, but tonight the centre where they were due to stay remains largely empty.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, this used to be a circus in Zaporizhzhia. Now it is a reception centre for those displaced by the fighting. The Russians are only about 40 miles down the road. You can see they've got mattresses on the floor for when people arrive and they can get some sleep. So far, they've had about 250 people here who have been given clothes and food and medicine and so on, but they are expecting many, many more from Mariupol particularly. You can see here the people of Zaporizhzhia have been generously donating everything they can to help these people who've been forced to leave their homes and leave everything behind in most cases by the fighting. We understand that this convoy that was due to come out today, it's the second attempt, has now been cancelled, and I think they're going to try again tomorrow from Mariupol, but they are expecting thousands, probably tens of thousands of people here and in a couple of other reception centres like this. We're told that so far only 3 families have managed to escape from that port city, dodging the shelling as they went to get out and were processed here. But this really is going to become very busy once the enormous number of people escape. It's a city of 400,000 people that's been under shelling for many days now. And here at least they will have some respite. They'll have some food, some clothes, medicine before they can then be taken to safety.
Dan Rivers reporting there. Let's take a look at the situation on the ground on day 11 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia is continuing its advance in the north and south of Ukraine, with several key cities surrounded, however, still under Ukrainian control. In the north, the Russians have opened up a new corridor as they advance on Kyiv, now from the east as well as the north. And in the south of the city of Mariupol remains under Ukrainian control, but is surrounded and under bombardment. Well, today's second ceasefire, as we've been hearing, lasted less than 3 hours before Ukrainian officials warned of further shelling. Our Europe editor James Mates is in the capital, Kyiv. And James, 11 days into the Russian advance, just how tough is the situation tonight?
Is every bit as bad as we feared it would get. Unable to take ground quickly, the Russians have turned to simply bombarding cities into rubble. And the 2 principal victims are Kharkiv in the northeast and Mariupol, of course, in the south. They won't even silence the guns long enough to let the people out. You know, when the Germans bombed Guernica or Coventry, they may have found it easier because their victims were Spanish or British, but both these cities are predominantly Russian-speaking. These are people who Putin himself said were fellow Russians, one people. He has been on the telephone today to France's President Macron. They spoke for almost 2 hours. Putin absolutely not backing down. He said he denied that he is targeting civilians and said that the denazification, as he calls it, will continue. France trying to keep a diplomatic route open, for which they must be given credit, but at the moment it's achieving absolutely nothing.
All right, James, as ever, thank you. Well, around 4,000 people have been detained at anti-war protests in Russia itself. The demonstrations took place in 53 cities, but human rights groups report that almost half of the arrests were in Moscow. Well, the world is now having to respond to the vast number of refugees fleeing the Ukraine. More than 1 million of those who have left have passed into Poland. Our correspondent Rebecca Barry is in Przemysl on the Polish border, where she met some new arrivals who sought refuge in a church.
At a time like this, people talk of evil. Those that believe look to God. Most Ukrainians are Orthodox Christians, and at the Church of Our Lady of Sorrows on Poland's border with Ukraine, they were praying for them. The war hasn't crossed the border yet, the priest told his congregation, but it exists among us in the people who've fled their homes. People like Vera, who left Lviv with her 4 children. After the service, we follow them upstairs to the church rafters and find a scene reminiscent of another European war, when those fearing for their lives hid in attics. At home in Ukraine, Vera was a teacher. She thought they'd only be away for a week.
I pray for Ukraine, for our soldiers, for our people, for our
future.
For our future.
And your children's future?
Yes.
And each day brings more families just like them.
More than 1.5 million people have now fled Ukraine. Around 1 million of them have come here to Poland. It's a number hard to fathom. Each one a life, a future, upended.
Back in the church attic, at least Vera and her children are warm, grateful for the help, but now trapped in uncertainty. Rebecca Barry, ITV News, Przemysl, Poland.
Here, the government is coming under pressure over its response to the refugee crisis. More than 11,000 people have begun the process of applying for the scheme set up for Ukrainian family members. So far, just 50 have been fully approved. Our political correspondent Carl Dinnan has been examining why.
There has been pressure on the government to accept more Ukrainian refugees, and a new visa scheme was opened on Friday. Today, the Home Office said it had so far granted 50 visas. But after meeting the Ukrainian ambassador, the Home Secretary said the scheme had only just started.
The scheme opened on Friday, on Friday afternoon. I was in Poland, actually, on the border, when we launched the scheme. Let's be clear, this is the first scheme in the world that's up and running in this short period of time. 10,000 applications, and yes, grants are happening as we stand here right now.
As of this morning, the Ukraine family visa scheme had seen nearly 12,000 applications started, 5,500 submitted, 2,000 interview appointments booked, and those 50 applications granted.
We're not complaining. So that's our dog over there.
Yuri is an electrician in Maidstone. His partner, Anastasia, escaped across the Ukrainian border 7 days ago. Now they're in Calais trying to navigate her visa application.
Why it was difficult? Because the website, where we're supposed to upload our documents, it wasn't working. So it was just bugging from time to time. So only today we had finished.
Has it been a difficult journey?
Yeah, very difficult.
Has it been frightening?
Yes.
But interviews aren't even being carried out in Calais, so now they have to go to Brussels. With as many as 200,000 applications expected, the Home Office say they are surging staff into all their visa application centres around Europe.
Carl's with me now. The Prime Minister spoke to President Zelensky today to discuss what more the UK could do. Britain has to react not just to the refugee crisis, but also trying to coordinate some kind of international response.
Yeah, that's right. And in his phone call with President Zelensky, he said he would be trying to get more weapons to the Ukrainian military. They also discussed the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Ukraine. Tomorrow, both the Canadian and the Dutch Prime Ministers will be in Downing Street, followed on Tuesday by a number of East European leaders as they all try to coordinate the international response. At the same time, in Parliament tomorrow, the government will be trying to get through legislation to make it much quicker to bring in sanctions against Russian oligarchs and Russian companies, although there are a number of backbenchers who think they still could be tougher and faster. So I expect a bit of a battle tomorrow to see who can bring in the toughest ideas and the fastest ideas for sanctions.
All right, Carl, for now, thank you. Well, today we learnt that the United States is considering a ban on all imports of Russian oil. Our US correspondent, Emma Murphy, joins me from Washington. Emma, what effect could that have?
Well, the hope is that that will deplete Russian funds because around $70 million a day is currently being paid to the Russians in order to buy oil. And there is a feeling from both Republicans and Democrats here that that money is basically funding the war and they need to try and address it. It will be something they'll have to discuss in partnership with the EU and the UK because, of course, so many nations are paying that money to Russia. The other thing that we've heard in the last few minutes is from the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who is travelling around Europe. He has said now that the green light has been given to provide Russian-made fighter jets that are currently stationed in Poland to the Ukrainians to try and control the airspace. The Americans will then try and backfill the Polish supply of fighter jets so that they are secure in their own position. And the other thing that he's been talking about today is war crimes. There is a feeling that there is evidence now that war crimes are being committed. Unfortunately, as they are being documented, more war crimes are likely being carried out.
Emma, thank you. And of course, more analysis of the latest from Ukraine. Check out our ITV News podcast, What You Need to Know, the latest. How Far Will Putin Go is available where you get your podcasts. And that is it for now. I am back with the late news at 10. Until then, enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.